Okay, hello everyone. I am Riley Sweeney, as most or all of you know. Today I'll be giving my capstone presentation, which is on cryptography. The name of my presentation and my paper are Cryptography, It Is Not That Scary, or Is It? So we will have a introduction, we'll talk about cryptography, give some definitions and the different types, as well as break into a decryption example because I thought decryption would be more fun than encryption. We'll talk specifically about public key cryptography, which is symmetric versus asymmetric. We'll talk more in depth about Diffie-Hellman and explain a little bit more of what Kyle was talking about on Monday, as well as follow up with a conclusion. So, cryptography is something that is really confusing and complex to most people. This is because when looking at it in a glance, it does not always make sense. It's not supposed to be something that's easy to comprehend. Actually, I chose this topic because of the couple times that I had to mess around with it in math to connect math and CIS within Clark, and it continuously fascinates me because every time you get a little deeper in, it gets a little more tricky, but it's always surprising. So throughout this presentation, I hope to be able to convey some of the fascinations and complexities that come along with cryptography and why it's so challenging to understand at first, but then becomes very exciting. So we're going to look at 4 different definitions of cryptography just to show how narrow they can be, as well as how expanded they can be, and see that they really ultimately all mean the same thing depending on the way you look at it. So the first one I found just when you type it into Google, so Google Dictionary, and it's cryptography is the art of writing and solving codes. The second one was from Corsa, which is cryptography is an indispensable tool for protecting information in computer system. The third one is cryptography is associated with the process of converting ordinary plain text into intangible text and vice versa. Ultimately saying that it's taking a normal message and encrypting it, and then taking the encrypted message and decrypting it. And then finally, we have cryptography involves creating written or generated codes that allow information to be kept secret. It converts data into a format that is unreadable for an unauthorized user, allowing it to be transmitted without unauthorized entities decoding it back into a readable format, thus compromising the data. So as we can see from the first one, which was like 5 words, to the last one, they ultimately are stating the same thing because it's talking about encryption and decryption, but they can focus a little bit in different areas. So there are many different types of cryptography. On the screen we have codes and ciphers, which is what we'll talk about when we look at the decryption example. Substitution, which is ultimately similar to codes and ciphers, it just depends on how you use them. But a big prime example is taking the alphabet from A to Z and then flipping it around, making A, Z, B, Y, and so on and so forth. And then we have public key cryptography, which the examples that we'll talk about today are the symmetric versus the asymmetric cryptography. We have one-time pad cryptography, which is a crypto algorithm where plain text is combined with a random key mathematically unbreakable encryption. So it makes it a little more challenging. And then we have stenography, which is hiding data within images and music and video files, which not always is seen to the naked eye, but it can be in there if you have training within. So looking at the symmetric cryptography and the asymmetric cryptography, we have symmetric cryptography is using the same key to encrypt and decrypt a message. So me and Amber, if we were trying to share a message, what I have to use to encrypt it is what she would have to use to decrypt it. So it's not necessarily always the safest because it is the same information. And then asymmetric is when you have the 2 keys, which is one public key and one private key per person. So it makes it a little harder to be able to interpret the message within the time frame right away without having to know one or the other. It's also harder to go backwards because when we get through the Diffie-Hellman example, we'll understand a little more, but you end up with one thing, but you don't exactly know how you got there. So you have the message, you just don't know how to go backwards with it. So looking further into symmetric cryptography, we have the two different branches ultimately. Block ciphers, which are algorithms that operate on a fixed size block of data using a shared key and a secret key. This is the type of cipher that is more commonly used because of the rate of bits that the data is being encrypted and decrypted. So within that, there's, obviously you can see there's the 4 different branches. There's more, but these are the main ones that people know about. DES, AES, Blowfish, and 3DES. DES is one that's not frequently used much any longer because AES does the same thing except does it faster and with much larger bits of data. When doing my research, DES was like 56 bits, which if you like break that down, it's like 8 letters per time it encrypts or decrypts. And then AES can do 128 to 156, and I think it's like 218 is the different ranges that it focuses in. And then for stream ciphers are something that are not commonly used as much anymore. This is because of a couple different reasons. Like I said, it takes more time and it does it 1 bit at a time, where the other ones, or block ciphers, do it over and over again with multiple large chunks of data, as well as is more complex to use, and it doesn't work as well with heavier loads. And the main one that goes along with that is the 4CR, or RC4. So then looking at symmetric cryptography, or asymmetric cryptography, we have the RSA, ECC, and then the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, which, like I've stated previously, we'll go through. So, looking at decryption. So, this is where the tables in front of you are going to come into handy. I'll show you the slide which talks about the first table, and then I'll tell you when you're looking at the second table, but it will help when we move further down. So, this message, GFPYRHYCVYRP space X doesn't look like it means anything in any way, shape, or form. And that's why an example of cryptography like this works, because you don't really know what the message is at all whatsoever. So, and just for reference, like I said when I was stating it, this is a space, just so you can see that it's there and not that there's like the X standing by itself. So, looking at the first table, we have to take the letters that we were using, which is in the ciphertext 1, and transfer them into the ciphertext, which is the numbers. So, I did the substitution for you, but if you want to see it and follow along as well, G turns into 19, F turns into 7, and P 4, and so on and so forth. But then again, looking at the numbers, if they were all squished together, 19, 7, 4, 26, 4, 13, 3, 26, and so on, really wouldn't look like anything except a bunch of jumbled numbers. And you wouldn't be able to necessarily always know where they start or end, because if we're going from 1 to 26 like we did in this example, the 1 could be multiple. It could be 1, or it could be 1 and whatever the number follows with it. So going into the second table, we are going to take those numbers and then encrypt or substitute them in for the letters, which are in the plain text, which will give us our answer. So we have the 19 this time turns into a T, 7 turns into an H, 4 turns into an E, 26 turns into a space. So the message that we were looking for was the end is near. So taking the encrypted message and decrypting it, looking at them together, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell that that's what was going to happen, because G, F, P, Y, there's not really any vowels within that message. So obviously Y is kind of a vowel, but it's not really. And there's not even any Y's in the actual message. So on to our next example, with the asymmetric key exchange example, we have Diffie-Hellman, which is Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman. Now there are some arguments about the name of this, because there was a person named Merkle involved in it as well. When the Diffie-Hellman key exchange was created many years ago, In 1975, it went under investigation to see if it should still be used or not. And in that time frame, a couple years before, Merkle had been doing some research that kind of followed along with that form of encryption, and his professor in California told him that that was pointless and not necessary to use because it wasn't going to get him anywhere in life. So when the NSA was under investigating Diffie-Hellman, they decided to kind of pair up and see if they can make their key exchange stronger. And as Kyle had mentioned, it's as of right now unbreakable. I mean, that could change tomorrow. But they were able to work it together so that it was no longer as small as the 56-bit that it started off as, and made it stronger. I believe it's up to 218 as before. So what we need to know is that it is an exponential key agreement. It allows two users to exchange a secret key, and it requires no prior secrets. It can happen in real time. So if I had a public key and a private key, and Amber had a public key and a private key, we would be able to get the same message without having to actually talk about it previously, as long as our prime numbers match up and we're using that together. So, and then the other part is that there's no successful attack strategies that are known as of right now. And then, like I said, it requires two numbers that are the same, and those numbers have to be prime. So 1, 3, 5, 7, so on and so forth. They get much larger, much quicker once you get past 100. So ultimately, the goal for the Diffie-Hellman key exchange is quantity of G to the A mod P of the quantity of B, or to the B mod P is equal to G to the B mod P to the A mod P. Now, mod is taking it into a different, like, base almost. So the P, like I said, is a prime number. So in this case, we'll use 23, but if you were to look at it and it was 1 or 3 or 7, you would only count to as high as that number was. So if we're in mod 23, you're only going to count to 23, and then you'll restart at 1. So, like I said, we have two people. The first person and the second person both have P and G. Now the first person is going to have lowercase a and uppercase A. Uppercase A is going to be that first chunk of what the equation was, so the first set within the parentheses, so it's going to be G to the A mod P for person 1. It's going to be G to the B mod P for person 2, and person 2 will also have lowercase b. Now in this case, we're going to take those and give them their numbers. So like I said, P was going to become 23, G was going to become 5, person A is just going to use 6 as their private key, and then when you substitute those in, person A gets 8, and when we do the same thing, person 2 also has 23, they have 5, their private key is going to be 15, and again when you substitute that in, 5 to the 15th is 23, or mod 23 gives you 19. So from here, they will exchange their, these aren't private keys, these are public keys. They will exchange their public keys with each other. And so we will have A is equal to 5 to the 6th mod 23, which, like I said, gives us 8. When you substitute all of that in, you get 5, 8 to the 15th mod 23, which ultimately gives you 2. And then for person 2, we have B is equal to 5 to the 15th mod 23, which, like we said, is 19. When you substitute that into the overall equation, that gives you 19 to the 6th mod 23, which ultimately, again, gives you 2. So like I said, you can't necessarily tell where it came from at the beginning or at the end if you were trying to move backwards, because if you just think about for 3 seconds how many ways you can get to 2 with using addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, there's infinitely many, and then when you add in the other forms of mathematics, there's even more than that. So, and that's with any numbers, not just 2, I promise. So it's kind of interesting to see, like in this case, we just had one simple number, but if this was an entire message and you had to do that for each of the letters that you're looking for to then substitute them in later, it'd take you forever. That's why you can only really go one way, and it's more secure with the having the public key and the private key separate for each person, and then they share. So we ultimately came to our goal of g to the a mod p to the b mod p is equal to g to the b mod p to the a mod p. So, in conclusion, as one can see, there's a lot that goes into encryption and decryption process of cryptography. It is a very complex system and is changing every minute and even more every day. The challenges that are never ending as the bad people keep getting smarter and catching on to some of the patterns that are being found within each of the different types. As can be seen throughout the one Diffie-Hellman example, there's a lot of mathematics that goes into cryptography. Now, with that, the ciphers used in this presentation I created just for the purpose of this presentation. I didn't pull them from anywhere. But it's not just always numbers. Like we started with letters and moved to numbers and then moved to letters. It can just stay letters the entire time, and that can also change within the symmetric and asymmetric sides of cryptography as well. In addition, if there was more time for this project, I would have looked deeper into the symmetric side of the public keys cryptography, just because there's a lot more in-depth like coding and more equations, and there's more processes to follow. There's a lot of diagrams that I had to look at when doing research for this, so it was really fascinating to kind of follow them along. I just didn't have time to break them apart as much as I did for the asymmetric, since it was more mathematics and pulled my attention a little more. However, with that being said, there's a lot of repetition that goes into the different algorithms, and the other direction that I would look at, which we were kind of talking about at the beginning, is looking into the quantum realm of cryptography. We all know that quantum is going to kind of destroy numbers and computer security and all of that as we know it today when it finally comes into full swing. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that changes the rest of the world as that happens. Thank you.
I open it up for questions. No questions? Quiet group.
Asymmetric, it's public and private key, right? Is that what it was?
Asymmetric, yes.
So which one was the public and private?
Within the example? So these were their public keys, because they used them as their initial numbers, but then they had to transfer them to go into these examples, because 15 started with person 2 and 6 started with person A, and they flipped them to take them to the exponent. And then the private keys were these numbers, the ones that they solved for with their public keys, the 8 and the 19.
What are some places where this is like useful, like outside of maybe Bluetooth?
A lot when like looking through my research in my previous projects is used within like making sure obviously messages are encrypted, and within like the NSA to keep their data within their own intelligence agency secure.
If the Diffie-Hellman key exchange is like so impenetrable, why would any other type of like encryption method be ever used?
That's a great question, and I'm assuming that it's based on the fact that what it's used for. So I would, like, if you're measuring something, you use whatever's closest to what you're using, or you can add up. If it doesn't fit, then necessarily I don't think that it would work as well. But I think it's just depends on how secure it has to be. Any other questions?
Can you show me the mod formula again? Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, the quantity of g to the a mod p to the b mod p is equal to the quantity of g to the b mod p to the a mod p.
How many times did you practice that?
Not very many.
You did it really, really well. Really well. In fact, when you did it the first time, it almost sounded like a little song. You should think about YouTube and that. It'll probably go viral. It just flowed exactly like it's G to the A by P. Very good.
I mean,
very
after
good.
math capstone, if you saw the equations I had to read in that, it was like superscript, subscript, superscript, subscript. So it was rough.
Yes, I am intimately familiar with those formulas. Intimately. Any additional questions? All right, good job.